every Tuesday at this exact same time, same place on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, X, Facebook, and TikTok. We're streaming live. So thanks for joining wherever you're listening or watching here today. Every week we cover things from a tech agnostic angle to talk about related to digital transformation, including the strategy, people, process, and technology sides of things. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformation journeys, including their AI and data journeys, which is the topic here today. We're going to dive in here today to talk about data and AI and AI strategy and that sort of thing. So there's a lot we're going to get to here today as it relates to the topic, which I'll set up here and introduce our guest in just a moment. Before I introduce our guest, though, wanted to cover a couple of logistical items. First of all, this is a live interview. So by being part of this live interview, you're actually part of our live production of our Transformation Ground Control podcast. So what we do is we do these live interviews, we edit it, we add additional content to it, and then we repackage it as a formal official podcast episode that'll come out in about 2 weeks from tomorrow. So thanks for being here and being part of our podcast production here every Tuesday morning. Secondly, I'd love to hear where you're joining from today. If you don't mind just dropping in the chat, which is, by the way, the same chat you can use to ask questions as we go through the conversation here today. Anything that's on your mind related to AI strategy, AI in general, data migration, data management. Those are kind of the two main areas we're going to cover here today. So feel free to drop those in the chat at any point. But while you're thinking of questions to ask us, I have a question for the audience here. I'd love to hear what city and country you're joining from today. So if you don't mind just dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from, I'd love to hear where our global audience is joining from here today. My guest and I are both in Denver, Colorado in the USA today, but love to hear where you guys are from. So again, today we're going to talk about data and AI and sort of the intersection of those two areas. Joining me to unpack the conversation is Khalid Morris from Third Stage Consulting. And Khalid, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this will be a fun conversation. I've been looking forward to this for a few weeks now since we first scheduled it earlier this year. But before we get started and dive into all things related to data and analytics and AI, tell us a little bit first about your kind of your role at Third Stage and also your background. How'd you grow up in this space?
Well, I'm one of the directors of strategy and transformation at Third Stage. I've been doing that since 2021. So a few years now. I kind of left the Big Four world. So I was coming from Deloitte, but I also spent some time at Accenture. And I've been doing consulting really since I left graduate school at the University of Denver. So we're pushing. Yeah, I'm almost scared to start talking about numbers because it's just starting to date me here. But we've been doing this for over 20 years.
Yeah, well, when I first met you, you were just a young pup who was just getting started. Now here we are, 15 years later.
One podcast, 20 years later.
Yeah, who knew? So how did you like tell us a little bit about how you got started in consulting and sorry, because you have an interesting upbringing. You're not a career consultant necessarily. You didn't start off in consulting, but tell us where you started, how you adjusted or transitioned into consulting, and ultimately how you ended up in this whole space with AI and data.
Yeah, I'm not a career consultant and I'm not a career tech guy. My background is actually finance and accounting. That's how I started. I went to graduate school in business here in Denver, and then coming out of that is when I started my consulting journey. And with that, you kind of brought me in from a financial perspective because that was my background. That's kind of what I knew. That's what was studied. And the tech side of me in consulting just started to develop because I just would say yes, and I'd figure out problems. I'm a problem solver. I kind of like challenges, and it didn't bother me to have to figure things out. But the information age really just brought about a lot of just changes and sort of a dynamic element to the business marketplace that I don't think a lot of businesses were really ready for. And I kind of got caught up in a lot of that, in that, you can't always just hire for certain positions because it's not like school teaches you, how to deal with the latest and greatest technology, right? The schools usually teach you matured, established things. And so a lot of the times I would just kind of be on site and they would ask me, oh, could you figure this out? And that's kind of what pulled me into certainly the data side, but just into the technology side in general, is just being on projects and being responsible for them and having to solve some problems that we couldn't hire for in a month and a half or 2 months. And so we had to kind of figure out, and then you sort of build an acumen based on that. So just answering questions, figuring out questions and answering questions is sort of how I kind of got looped into the technical aspect of it. And it kind of brought me into some really technical spaces, particularly around data and data integration and kind of merging applications. I kind of was there from the programming side to the software as a service side, and kind of as things kind of went to cloud computing, computing, your role kind of changes, and the ask kind of change, and you sort of start to solve different problems, and it sort of just starts to build a different just professional acumen or skill set in general. And I think we're kind of there now with AI. I think AI has sort of just popped up, and then all of a sudden you have to answer all of these AI questions, and you have to figure things out from an AI perspective. It reminds me of the cloud. It reminds me of when things went from on-prem to cloud-based. You kind of have this sort of shift where companies sort of had to figure out, like, how do I move stuff? How does this work best for me? Is there value here? And obviously, organizations are smart; they figure it out. But yeah, this era now reminds me of that.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for sure. It's kind of like that transition from on-prem to cloud, but on steroids. I mean, just
On steroids. Yeah. Well, because there's a paradigm shift on top of that too. So it's not just a functional need there, but there's a major threat to your business can get canceled from a strategic side, right? So there's a AI strategy part that sort of needs to be layered with what it is you're doing. And these are technical things. So it's not like people just know. Like, you say, okay, well, what is your strategy? They don't really have a strategic view of this, because it wasn't like they've been thinking about this for the last 5 or 10 years, right? It just sort of popped up on them. It's like, I don't know. You just presented this question yesterday. I don't know the answer yet. So that's where it becomes interesting from a consulting perspective, from a business perspective. And, it's just one of those things that we all have to adjust to.
Yeah, it's the first time in my career. I don't know about you, but it's the first time in my career where I feel like, as a profession in consulting, you're sort of like you said, there's not a lot to draw on in terms of maturity and well-established ways of doing things, and so that's what makes it pretty exciting. Just it's changing so fast, and we're all learning a lot as we go through this transition to AI and everywhere we're headed. So I want to turn to the audience here real quick, and pull up some comments. Some of them are entertaining. This is from I Love Pizza on YouTube, asking what this is. This is a conversation about data migration. So thanks for being here today. Hopefully you find some value here. Kiran from India, thank you for being here today. Dom's joining us on YouTube. Thank you for joining us. We've got Nikhil from YouTube, who's building a data virtualization software for manufacturing based in Dallas. Given that my software is related to data and AI, I thought it'd be interesting to join here. So, interesting to have you here. Thanks for being here. Ashley's joining us on YouTube as well. Darian says, good morning. Good morning, Darian. Thank you for being here. That's our co-host for the podcast. So she had to be here, but thank you for being here anyway. And then we've got Kieran talking again about planning digital transformation business solutions firm in the coming months, searching the things related to the startup. And then Nikhil says, is it true that a lot of organizations collect data, but they don't use that data for decision making? What are your thoughts on that, Khalid, just to start things off, and then I'll get into some of the questions I have too.
I think that it's very, very true. I think that organizations, I think the cloud has softened people on data, right? Like, it has sort of created this security blanket for folks that they've kind of been living in for the last, 10 or so years, that they've kind of been in this cloud paradigm. And I say that because your data is sort of in this weird space that you don't really have access to, but sometimes you have access to, that you might have access to, that you probably should have access to, but you don't know where it is. Or it's in this space where, and this is normally what we see with our clients, is just, it's all over the place. You might have 10 different programs that you're working on, and the data in the cloud lives with one software group, and over there different is doing a different cloud, and you have proper integrations in place maybe, but the data lives kind of over there too, and it's all over the place. So if you're doing inventory, in our case, when we kind of do a catalog or some kind of inventory, then you just see data sources all over. And it's particularly bad for groups that have legacy software internally. And so then you have to couple the parts of it that is SaaS based, and then with the parts of your organization that kind of has this more structured old legacy kind of software that nobody knows how to touch, or maybe you're dealing with some employees that kind of have tenure there because they know how to operate a software that most aren't even learning anymore. So it's so many different dynamics, but yeah, that's sort of what happens. You just sort of have a collection of data all over the place. It's kind of like a messy house. You just have things all over. And I think part of what AI forces us to do is what we should do anyway. But AI kind of forces it, depending upon what your strategy is you got to go clean up your room. And once you clean it up, then it makes more sense. It's like, oh, okay, this is why I've been looking for this. I didn't know this was there. And you kind of start to answer some of your own questions. For one, I can't study or think if my room is like really, really messy. So it shows what I'm going through in life. If you walk into my room and it's nice and clean, then everything's fine. If you walk into my room and it's messy, it's like you got a lot going on right now. You're probably pretty stressed. So I liken that to the data environments at organizations.
Yeah. And I think that's why products and companies such as Snowflake have done so well, because they're sort of taking advantage of the fact that organizations have these data silos and different systems and all that stuff. But to your point, so many companies just can't get the basic, like they can't run a basic report because the data is such a mess. And then you start throwing in AI as a potential option. People get all excited about AI and think, oh, that's cool. Let's use all these AI capabilities. Well, AI doesn't do crap for you if you don't have good data. I mean, if you've got bad data, you're just wasting money by trying to get AI to work for you. So do you see that being a pitfall or an obstacle that companies fully?
Well, I almost, and this is just like with any, I guess, shift like this, just a lot is being thrown at you at once. We are so not prepared kind of for that moment. I don't think we really walked into 2025 thinking this is what we have to deal with, right? Literally, we're in March and everyone's dealing with it. And I don't know if January 1, that was on the top of the resolution list, right? Like it sort of has just sort of been flagged. In terms of me, it has been, but just in general, I think a lot of companies have been thrown into this and they feel a bit surprised, and they turn around and they see all these tools. And it's just like, so you can do this and you can do that. And so they're seeing the advanced elements of it. And that is kind of what's jogging. AI is very feature oriented right now. Everyone wants to tell you their AI feature, and that's almost clouding the back end. It's almost like you can see the UI and all the pretty things that's happening, but you don't know how the application was actually built. And on the back end, it kind of tells a different story. And that to me is where the data lives, because if you really want to empower your AI strategy, then you'll do something on the data. The data part of this story can't be ignored, right? Like so they kind of work in unison depending upon what your strategy is. Sure, if you just want to use features, go feature yourself to death. You can go chat GPT it, or use one of the more popular faces. ERP systems have incorporated these quick, nice, kind of easy ways to sell their program. They say, hey, we have this AI feature or that AI feature. And so, you almost have to ask yourself, when am I in AI and when am I not in AI? You almost feel like you're Neo in the Matrix. You're like, so when am I in it and when am I not in it? Like, how does it work? And still you have this back end that is where all of your data lives. Like so are you searching for AI features that are outside of your organization, or are you searching for capability within your organization from an AI perspective? Those are natural questions. And then when you ask those questions, then you have to ask yourself the data that supports it. Like, where is it? Where does it live? And is it empowering whatever AI feature I'm trying to use in the way that I expect it to?
Right. Makes total sense. Now we're gonna keep coming back to this AI thread for sure, and that's a key part of what we're gonna talk about. But here's a comment or a question here from uh, Arun on YouTube. Says, what key factors should organizations consider when planning a large scale data migration? That's a pretty loaded, that's a big question. But how would you summarize some of the things that companies need to think about as they think about how to clean up their data and migrate to these new systems?
That's really, I think, where it starts. I mean, you can want to do data migration till you're blue in the face, but you really have to see the raw form. I think the steps are pretty basic, and it kind of starts with cleaning. And so, you, especially if you have multiple data sources. So I don't know what the source end of that kind of looks like. And it would be great if you just have one source of data and you have to migrate one source of data to one other target source online or some secure kind of storage area. That's great, and if you can get it, that's awesome. But that's usually not the case. I mean, usually it's a multitude of data sources, and when they come in, they look different and they act different because one source they're used to it this way, and another source they're used to it another way, and you have to sort of create rules and standards, and that's kind of where the cleaning part of it comes from. So really, just having a plan at each of these stages is what I would suggest. And it's okay to start slow and start kind of at that first level to kind of say, how do we get everything that we want to migrate into a staging environment that allows us to sort of push where the target is, right? Like, I think that's a smarter strategy than trying to push every source to the actual target. I feel like there's a little more work there. But getting everything kind of in the same place, and then starting to do the cleansing exercises so that you kind of have a basic set of data that you can kind of apply. I don't call them global rules, but apply sort of a set of transformation rules to, so that it can properly load into whatever the target is. That would sort of be my approach.
Yeah, makes total sense. And it's not just about getting the data there. That's part of it. It's cleaning up the data, mapping it, migrating, all the stuff you just talked about. But what about the governance behind it, as far as putting processes in place to ensure that the data doesn't just get corrupt again as soon as you put it in? Because I think a lot of times people don't realize the impact that humans have on dirty data and siloed data and all that stuff. So how do you?
Well, it's for really large scale data, you kind of have to do that because it's so much, and you kind of have owners depending on your environment. If you're in an environment like we've described, where you have data that's scattered all over the place, usually they have different owners, and that's usually why you might have a product owner that uses one SaaS program. And someone, a different department, uses a different program, and part of the exercise is to sort of bring all of that over into this sort of migrated area. And kind of in instances like that, you're kind of living in a world where you kind of need owners. Like, okay, can you tell me, is this right? Like, is this all of the data? Is this accurate? A technical person can't really speak to that. A functional person can usually tell you, or the owner can usually tell you, these are all of our suppliers, or this one shouldn't be there anymore. We don't use this guy anymore, or this value is correct. It ties to whatever validation that they're sort of using. So from a data governance perspective, for large scale data, you definitely need it. If it's a smaller company, maybe you can get away with some things that you can get away with kind of a more reduced kind of governance kind of effort. But if it's a larger organization, I don't know that you have a choice. Once you get past the actual migration, though, I think that's where data governance becomes interesting, because most people just leave it. They just sort of let it go. And that's where your organization starts to fall back into some of the bad habits that it's had for some time. So I think data governance is a great maintenance, a great way to remain efficient, a great way to check on the validity of your data and accuracy of it, kind of across the board. It's sort of a basic lean principle, if you will, if you think about it from a continuous improvement perspective. So I'm an advocate of keeping governance measures in place, kind of post migration, post implementation, and just kind of have quality checks around those things, just to make sure that the health of your data is good going forward. I don't think organizations think of their data as a strategic asset. Like if you ask them, okay, what are the assets of your organization? They'll list buildings and they'll list all of these cool things that really have a tangible value to the organization, but they won't think of data as part of that. And I personally believe that it's probably the most valuable asset in your organization, right? You take your data out, your whole organization collapses. And
Yeah.
so it's very, very important, but a lot of times organizations don't treat it like that. And so when I say things like ongoing and data governance should be a part of your practice, it's just, I mean, you would do that for any valuable asset. You would just make sure that you have proper processes and procedures in place just to safeguard the value of that, because it's a significant part of your organizational value. Well, to me, data is the same way. But we don't put safeguards on it. Instead, we have programs, 40, 50 different programs, and the data is kind of all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. That, that's well said. And here's another interesting question related to that. This is from Ognian on YouTube. Says clients asking for AI magic before the tidy up your data first stage is free. Wow, I cannot read today. Clients asking for AI magic before the tidy up your data first stage is frequent. You nailed it. I'm asking you for AI and you're telling me my data is bad.
Right. That's a hard conversation to have too, because it's
Yeah.
like you're talking on two different kind of wavelengths. I just, as you know, kind of wrote this book, Future Proofing Your Business with AI, and that was the challenge. It's kind of more of a conversational narrative that we have with our clients, and it's almost a plea of, look, I know you want to get here. I know you want to have these great conversations and these trends, but you almost want to really think about your strategy from the ground up.
Yeah.
And when you're really having a hard, like, how do we become competitive tomorrow? What does our organization look like tomorrow? You're not going to have those conversations if you're not talking about your data, right? If you're talking about everyone else's data, or, oh, we can bring in this from the cloud, or, oh, we can do this, or we can do that. But when you ask yourself the core parts of this business, what makes it special, and the data that drives that, that to me is where you start your AI conversation. Is, okay, let's get to what we do as a core, as a what we do well, what we do special, and let's look at the data there, and then ask yourself, how are we? Where does this data live? Do we have access to it? And is there analytical, intelligent, or AI driven strategic elements that we can place on top of that? Do we even have that capability? And most of the time the answer is no, we don't, because the data is sort of contained into this space. So then that opens up all the things that I think the viewer there was kind of alluding to, was now we have to get into migration conversations. Now we have to kind of get into these spaces of how do we create a safe space for our data so that we as an organization can apply value to it. We as an organization can actually use it. I can't use it when it's in for, I'm not picking on any, I'm not going to pick on any ERP systems, but I can't use the data the way I want to use it when it's in some other program.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've got a follow up to that exact point here in just a second. But before I do, I want to share with the audience something that we're pretty excited about at Third Stage. We are launching next week it should be published, but you can actually pre-register for it. It's a guide to AI strategy and implementation. So if you scan this QR code right here on the top left side of your screen, or if you're watching this after the fact on the podcast, you can go to the show notes below. We'll include a link to it. But scan the QR code right here and you can get access. We'll email it to you once it's released here in the next few days. But it's our pretty dense, information-packed guide to how to define an AI strategy and how to plan for an AI implementation as part of your digital transformation. So if that's something you're interested in on the AI front, be sure to download that and you'll get that paper as soon as it's released. So I'll leave that QR code up here for just a second for you to scan. It's your convenience here, and hopefully you'll learn a lot from reading that. So here's a question, Khalid, just to build on what you just said right before I mentioned the guide to AI. Nikhil on YouTube asks, is vendor lock-in a big challenge in data migration? So you were just talking about ERP versus AI, and I kind of want to dive into this a little bit because, all the big ERP vendors, NetSuite, SAP, Microsoft, all these guys and gals are investing heavily in AI. I mean, I don't know of a single software vendor that's not talking heavily about AI and investing in AI. So how do we navigate this whole vendor lock-in thing as it is? Because already I think a lot of companies are struggling with one system being the attempted one size fits all answer to all their technology needs. Now you throw AI in the mix, and obviously the ERP vendors are kind of trying to do a land grab here to try and get as much of that spend as they can. So how do you navigate that separation, or should there be a separation between AI and
I don't know that I look at it as a vendor lock. I think every organization has to answer an AI question. So I don't know how you get away from dealing with everyone else's AI, right? As it relates to whatever it is that you have going on. So in software before AI, like last year, or 2 years ago, if you want to go really, really far back, we kind of had a lot of discussions around best of breed versus kind of a unified kind of model. And no matter how you sliced it, you kind of always got pushed into some form of best of breed. It was either dramatic, where you just basically had pieces all over the place that you sort of brought together through integration, or you kind of had the space where 80% of your organization was on one platform and the rest of the 20% was sort of sparsed. And even ERP companies were pushing their third parties, and so you never really had a space where you had one organization, one software in your organization. And I think now with AI, you're kind of in that same mode. I mean, every organization is going to have their little slice of heaven, and they're going to sell that. You go look online, they're going to say, well, this is what we're doing in AI. It's almost like if you're not doing something in AI, then you're out of date. Then you're not serious about software, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know that you can get into a space where you're kind of locked in per se, and that you're just sort of dealing. Okay, well, what can you do to me? The questions that what can you do for me? The questions that I would have is, what are you doing with your AI, right? Because it's easy to take your eyes and turn to software companies for help, and say, okay, well, how can you AI enable my organization? But there's a host of, and we dealt with some of this in Stratosphere last year, but there's just a host of, I don't call them issues, but just things to sort out, with respect to where are you getting this data from, where's the legalities around, some of this, are there sort of hidden biases that are sort of in the algorithm that you're using, which may push me in one direction kind of versus the other, right? So there's just a series of things that you don't really control or understand from the way that another software company approaches AI. Right. They just present it to you, say, hey, we have an AI feature. And then you're like, well, that's great. It'd be great if you explained it to me. Like, how does how do these biases work? Like, because all AI, they sort of have these built-in biases around their algorithm, and you kind of need to kind of have maintenance around that exercise, right? So if they're not, after they explain that part to you, to me, the question is, well, what do I want to do? I mean, it's great that you're doing that and that I think that's great. And we certainly could use that. I think that's a great feature. But when I think about my organization and the core data parts that drive me, this is kind of where I need to take AI for this company, right? So I think we're going to get into an environment where everyone has their own AI, and the organization itself has to have their own personal AI that's sort of driving their organization, right? And that's, to me, outside of what Microsoft is sort of giving me, because Microsoft gives me a bunch of great tools, and another ERP system I have, or a bunch of great tools, and I may pick up another tool some kind of way, and all of that's great, and all of that is internet-wide access, right? But I don't know if I want internet-wide access for what I'm doing, right? So my organization data is not going to be available. I don't want my organization data. We're actually starting to put some of that in our vendor contracts. I don't want my AI, my core data to be available to the entire world. I want my core data to be available to me and my organization. And I do want AI that's layered on top of that to give me a competitive advantage for the data that I collect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a SAP can't help you that per se, right? Like they'll contain the data and that sort of thing, and you can migrate the data to a special place, and then you can deal with how you want your AI strategy to sort of function, particularly if it's a unique sort of functioning there. But inside SAP, it's going to be SAP for SAP clients. And they're going to have sort of these generic AI tools that work and that's great and that you should leverage, but it may not necessarily be that real unique driver that you're looking for, that you need for your organization. And so that's where I don't really look at it as lock-in. I think that you accept and you continue to build and grow and develop your AI strategy for your organization, so that you're leveraging multiple tools, and then naturally your organization can start to choose and work off of what's driving it the best, or what's going to kind of give it the best advantage going forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I kind of see both sides here, as far as there's value on both sides. Because I mean, you look at like SAP, for example. You mentioned SAP, and I remember on my Journey to S4HANA podcast, I don't remember who the guest was, but if you are interested in SAP stuff, if you go to journeyto s4hana.com, that's another sister podcast we do that's specialized. It's more focused on companies that are going through S4HANA implementations. But during one of the podcast interviews that I did there, one of the executives, I think from SAP, that was on there, was talking about how they had gotten approval from, I think it was 30,000 customers to share their data with their AI model. And on one hand, you think, well, that's pretty powerful. If you can get 30,000 of the world's biggest organizations sharing their data in this AI model and training this AI model, that's pretty powerful. That's pretty awesome. But then you think, to your point, the counterpoint that you made is, but you want to own that data. You want to create the competitive advantage. You don't necessarily want to help all your peers and all your competitors, So it's like, on one hand, they've got the scale, they've got the technology in a way that you could probably never replicate internally in-house with your own AI strategy, but you're just sort of watering down or sort of giving up your competitive advantage and your data, by the way. I mean, they don't own your data, but they can use it if you give them permission.
Well, and then you could go to the next step with that, and you have organizations that have sensitive data, and by law they can't even do that. So then what do? Right? It's like how much of this do I even have the ability to, just as an organization, just roll up into kind of this sort of standardized model where your AI model can learn all of these things and kind of provide these sort of features. I think this is where we get into the maturity of AI, and we don't even have laws right now that contain a lot of these things. And going forward, they do somewhat have some laws actually in Europe, but in this country we don't really have much framework at all. And so what happens when that's there? and then it becomes, I don't know how much of this great feature that you can or cannot use, or even having to create containers around some of that. So for me, I think it's great, and you let them deal with whatever they have to deal with, and you accept. Like if you mentioned SAP for Microsoft, I don't even know how you use Microsoft now without using Copilot. It's such a
Yeah.
great tool, and it's going to be all in the middle of everything that they do. And so you might not even have a choice in terms of how much of an AI you're using or not using from a given system. But it still comes back to, it's great that all these great people are thinking for me, and they're all smart, and all of these tools are brilliant, and they're very effective and helpful. But who knows your organization better? You or a tier one software, or if it's not even tier one, whatever software you're using. The answer is going to be you. And when you get into a small room with your team and you start to think about what really is going to move the needle for your organization, your AI strategy is going to look a lot different than what they're presenting you. And that's the conundrum that I think a lot of organizations are in the middle of. Sometimes they don't even know it. And they're having these AI conversations, and it's cool that they're having them. But I think the one conversation they're not having is, well, what is my organization going to do? What do we want to do? What do we need to do? What do we want to do? And I think that when you're in a space where you're competing against other organizations, the ones that are having those conversations and they're coming back to the marketplace with a real value add component to what they do, I think those organizations can win. And I think those organizations, set themselves up for long-term success versus the organizations that are kind of being reactive, like, wait, what can we do with what feature? And this, I don't even know if they're applying OCM to a lot of these new features. And so, who's using it, who's not using it, who cares to, how does it just turns into all these questions rather than kind of having kind of this functional practice within your business that kind of almost partners with AI, that becomes a part of strategy. So when I say AI strategy, I'm kind of thinking of more of a partnership versus, kind of having useful tools, like just another spreadsheet.
Yeah. That's super interesting. And this is actually a whole topic we're going to cover here in 2 weeks on this podcast. We'll have Marcus Harris on, and someone on LinkedIn, I don't see the name of the person, but someone on LinkedIn said this topic was addressed by Marcus Harris recently. And Marcus Harris is a software attorney that deals a lot with not only enterprise technology, but he also deals with intellectual property. So a lot of what we'll talk about here in 2 weeks from today is with Marcus Harris to talk about the legal implications of all this AI and data stuff, which is constantly changing. I mean, it's just like all of us. I think he's even learning and trying to keep up with all the evolutions of the legal implications here. So Fato on YouTube says, "I'm glad someone is having the talk, which is not inflicted by the hype." I like the word inflicted. And we have a definition of hype in this industry. Inflicted by hype. That sounds like a TV show or a podcast series or something.
Right.
So this is really interesting stuff. Okay, so there's like 3 different directions I could go, but just based on what you just said. What about? Let me go this direction. This is a question that was sort of stimulated by one of our peers at Third Stage. Yesterday, we had an internal meeting that you and I were both on, and Amanda Patton, who is one of our directors, we were having an internal meeting, totally unrelated to AI. We weren't even talking about AI, but we sort of had an in-passing conversation about ERP vendors and how they're handling AI, and just how some vendors are more mature and sophisticated in their AI tool set than others. And she made a comment in this meeting about NetSuite. She was talking about NetSuite in particular, about how it's a cloud-based system, and because it's a cloud-native system, that gives them some advantages from an AI perspective. How does cloud factor into all this, I guess, is where I'm going with this. So when you look at cloud and SaaS solutions, especially products like NetSuite or Salesforce or Workday, these systems that were built in the cloud and the architecture is built for the cloud, does that give those sorts of vendors any sort of advantage when it comes to their AI tool sets? Even though we're talking about, on one hand, maybe we shouldn't have the ERP vendors
Right.
doing all of our AI stuff for us, but for the ones that are building AI, does a cloud SaaS model help some of these cloud native systems, or are they in a better position from
I
an AI
think
perspective?
I think that it can. I think that the cloud kind of provides you with a certain access point, and there's a certain cleanliness and structure to the data that sort of lives in a cloud infrastructure that is very understandable, and it's probably easy to move around. I think that the whole cloud strategy was sort of built around ways to move data. So the integration part of just cloud architecture really became a gigantic thing. So if data is living in a cloud somewhere, it sort of naturally creates sort of an easier path for integration. But just in general, I think it kind of goes more back to the AI and kind of what it is. AI is like an amoeba almost. It spreads and its tentacles are kind of all over. So my question to something like that is, how much of the data does that AI cover? Is it all over that data set? Does it also include other elements there from the web or something like that? Like, you really have to start to ask the question around your AI, kind of what's contained, and what is the layer there from a AI perspective. In software development, there's kind of this kind of standard kind of practice called separation of concerns, and so you would have this, at least the way I learned it, you kind of would have these spaces where you kind of have business logic, and then you would have kind of your data kind of logic, and then you would kind of have what your programming kind of look like. And you would separate these things so that if you needed to change your data, if you wanted a different database or whatever the case may be, you could change it and it doesn't have to impact the rest of the application that you sort of built. I think of AI as a fourth layer that's kind of sitting right there too. And so when you kind of have that layered kind of breakdown, if AI is kind of sitting on top of your data, then that's sort of the parameters of what this AI feature or program is sort of working off of. And you almost want to ask yourself that is, and this is the part of the story you don't know when you're dealing with ERP companies and they kind of throw out, oh, we have this AI feature, then it kind of, my mind goes to, okay, where are you getting your data from? Is it me? Is it me and him? Is it all of us? Is it them? Is it like where are you getting your information from? And that to me is the big driver in that for ERP, and they're not really always forthcoming. You kind of mentioned SAP and him kind or them kind of isolating kind of those groups and kind of getting their permission to kind of work on their AI trained model there. That's probably the wave. That's probably what companies will probably have to do. Maybe SAP did that because Europe is starting to create laws around some of that, versus because I don't really always see that from American companies. They're not really asking a lot of those kind of questions. They're just doing stuff. And
Yeah.
I think it is something that we need to kind of know first, like, where are you getting this? What does it contain? And then kind of get into kind of, well, what are we doing with it? Like, what am I getting out of providing you with access to this or that? And then I think things start to make more sense to me. Otherwise, I think we're just having kind of these feature strategy, kind of random conversations about like clothing. Oh,
Mhm.
you got a new pair of shoes. Oh, that's awesome. I mean, I don't even know if those shoes are for, basketball or football or casual walking or what. It's just, they look cool, and
Yeah.
I'm glad you got them. You're happy, you're comfortable with them, and all of that. But I have no idea of how effective those are for you, what you're doing in them, like where they were made or what. So I think that we kind of need to kind of have another layered conversation on the AI side that kind of gets back to what the end is, not
Mhm.
kind of what the beginning is, but how all of this looks on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. I want to invite the audience again to check out our guide to AI. If you didn't catch it the first time, here's the QR code. If you download that guide, you can get our guide to AI strategy and implementation. It'll be released next week. So if you go ahead and register now, we'll send you an email with a link to that as soon as it's published next week. But one thing I want to do, I'm going to see if I can share this article with you here, Khalid. I'm just putting up a headline article from a Wall Street Journal. This is a really interesting article that came out a few days ago, and it kind of leads me to another question here. In fact, let me do something here. I'm kind of there we go. So this article I'm popping up on the screen was about Disney and how it's sort of like a feature story about an employee at Disney who downloaded some AI tool. A hacker got into that AI tool, and then it got into the Disney systems as a result. It kind of, I bring up this article because it's top of mind. It was recently, published as a feature story in the Wall Street Journal, but it brings up a really interesting question or a thought around cybersecurity. How do we, AI is opening up a whole nother set of loopholes or backdoor entries for cyber attacks. Now we don't just have to lock down our core ERP system. We've got to lock down all the AI tools and whatever other tools are integrated with that ERP system. So how does cybersecurity, what are your thoughts? I know it's a big general question, but
I think it's the same question. Now, I don't want to speak too far out of kind of my expertise in terms of what I know and don't know. But when I hear that, it really brings me back to the data, because as we start, that's your most strategic asset. So no one's trying to hack for no reason. They're trying to hack for the data. They want access to the streams of information, the data components there that kind of live in Disney. And so AI has sort of created natural pipes into your data sets. It just does. So you can naturally see how something like that can happen, and why I think it's more important to kind of to ask those kind of next questions around these AI features, and kind of really getting into the containers around, okay, well, what does this, where does this start and stop? And what does this have access to, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next, for me, if you do prioritize and protect your data as a strategic asset, then you do have a lot of those security layers kind of in place, right? It's organizations like Disney. I don't want to say organizations like Disney are easy to hack, because obviously that's not true. But I can see organizations like Disney having data all over the place because they're so gigantic and because they have so many companies. Disney is one of my favorite companies in the history of companies, even though they kind of have some weird historical pieces there. But I love their model. And now when you think about them, they own a lot of media. They're gigantic now. And it's easy to, just from what around acquisitions, it's like, well, how am I integrating, ESPN into the Disney model? They kind of have their own processes, their own procedures, their own kind of, this or that. So once you add AI into the mix, it's like, well, where's the shutoff valve? Is the water just going to flow all over the place, or is it contained to this, or is it contained to that? Or are we allowing this to sort of be all over the place? And then, like, your next question is, well, where are the safeguards for the data? And I think AI is moving so quickly that I don't see the same level of care, the same level of just in the regular programmatic sense, when you kind of have things like separation of concern, you have kind of these security elements and layers. And I think there's a lot of emphasis that's placed in basic programming around security and hacking and concern in that. And AI is just sort of this wild, wild west space where everyone's kind of just quick to market. How do I get this out there quickly? I want this feature to kind of live. And, we have these APIs because nobody's doing this themselves. So they create this API with, chat or somewhere else. And, you kind of have this sort of agreement to sort of piggyback on everyone else's growth and development in this space, rather than take time and care to sort of build it the right way, and just organically. That's the part that's sort of not happening. And so I can see how stuff like that just sort of pops up, is because, really smart programmers understand that and can see that, oh, okay, I can get through back doors that, this third party AI tool that, this organization leveraged in order to kind of do this or that. I can kind of get through that back door to get access to this strategic asset that's very, very valuable, that's left a little unsafe.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. And it's just, another reminder that, every time you layer on a new technology or a new tool, cybersecurity, how it affects your overall cybersecurity risk level. Here's an interesting point. AI is at the user acceptance testing stage. In the real world, there will be
Right.
issues which could slow down the implementation of
Right.
AI technology. That's a good point.
Right. No, that's a real statement. I mean, we're at the production level, like with user acceptance, and we find bugs along the way, but this is live.
Right. Yeah.
We shouldn't be finding bugs live, but that's just where the market is.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a couple other questions I'll pull up here. SaaS solutions. This kind of gets back to the point we're talking about with the advantage, if any, that cloud and SaaS providers might have. This is from Fado on YouTube. Says SaaS solutions have the advantage of having the infrastructure needed for such workloads, but then he follows up to say small and medium organizations still struggle to invest in the needed infrastructure. How do you feel?
They may struggle to. I think they struggle to understand it more. I think that SaaS has come a very, very long way, and I do think there are more affordable ways for small and mid-sized organizations to even. I mean, when you think about it, just the cloud infrastructure. As a small organization, can you move all of your data to a private cloud? The answer is yes. Does that have to cost you, a ransom note? And no, it doesn't have to, right? Just the thing that small and medium companies, they don't really have the luxury financially to just spend, and so they don't really know what to do with it once it's there. So it's like, well, yeah, I can do that. It won't be too expensive, but why would I do that? Like, what do I get out of that? And how does that help my organization? And I think for the longest, I would totally agree with them until now. Like, no, now you do have an AI component that you can layer on top of that. So there is a way to create unique value for your organization that no one else will have by housing your data in that kind of structure. Now, you don't necessarily have to have that kind of structure in order to take advantage of AI, but you start talking about organic and safe and sort of kind of natural structures to take advantage of this sort of style of programming, and that makes sense. And so I agree and disagree kind of with that as a result, and that's largely because I think it was once too expensive to do, even though it was affordable. I think it was just no value prop a lot of times for a lot of owners. But I do think that can turn very, very quickly now.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. Now, what about companies that are getting started, or they're not sure where to get started with their AI journeys? I'm gonna answer my own question, but I'm not really answering. I'm gonna let you answer it. But I'm giving the cheat answer here is if you want to get started on your AI journey, what you really should do is download this guide. So just scan this QR code right here, Guide to AI Strategy and Implementation. I'll leave it up for the rest of the conversation here. But beyond reading this guide, which is super information packed, what else can people be doing to get ready for their AI journeys? Like how should we get started, or what advice would you give to a team or an organization that's just dipping their toes in AI, trying to figure out how to move forward?
Well, and I kind of outlined some of this in the book, but it does kind of start with data. Now, I will couple that back with what you're saying here, which I do think is actually very, very important. We're kind of being a little cheeky with the QR code, but your research here is everything. Like, you do need to do your research, and I think part of that, when you think about it, is really just your planning stage, and like, what does planning sort of look like? AI strategy is is very much your just like business strategy at this point. It's going to turn into a natural parallel because there's a survival element there, and that your organization can be out of date, to be very, very blunt, in the future, by not taking care of the things that you need to take care of now from an AI perspective, right? Because your whole industry can be rendered useless, kind of with the snap of a finger, because the marketplace decides to go in a different direction, right? Because AI might be cheaper or easier of a solution to do what you've been profiting on for the last 10, 15 years. And so from that end, I think that the planning part is very, very important. I think you slow walk it a little bit, but you whiteboard. I think you really kind of get to a point where you're able to kind of start to set a vision for how your organization can look in an AI environment. And you're not going to be able to implement or execute on that particular vision without dealing with your data. So, for the practical side of the answer to this question is you start with your data and you make sure that your data model fits your vision and your strategy and in terms of what you're trying to do. But I think the sexy answer and kind of where you're trying to get to is I think it's on the whiteboard. I think it's in the room and you kind of being there with your team and being able to say how can we benefit from this. It's doing basic stuff like SWOT analysis and kind of being able to really assess the strengths and weaknesses of a given strategy to really land on what is going to be of value to our organization, right? That's nothing to do with technology. And we at Third Stage do this a lot. We constantly walk into clients and we tell them that we're here, and yes, we understand technology, and yes, we've implemented all of these softwares, and yes, this is a huge technical shift for your organization, but this is not an IT exercise. This is a business exercise. And I think for AI, we're in the same conversation. I think that this is a business exercise, right? So you need to understand business-wise what you're trying to do. And that's why I think it's important to have the AI conversation outside of ERP, because the ERP, they've already had that conversation, right? That's why they're coming to you in the marketplace and saying, these are the features. After we did our strategy, these are the features that we think make the most sense for our customers. And I think you kind of need to do the same thing. You kind of need to come up with what strategy is going to make sense for your customers and what they're dealing with. And you need to also understand that we're in a world now where your customers have access to AI. Right. So if your customers have access to AI and they can access these things and ask questions and find out answers to things that they couldn't necessarily find out answers to, how does that impact what we do? How does that impact what we provide? How do we have kind of an advanced level of conversation in our business with our customers, right? So that we're still providing them with value. So yes, I know you already looked this up and you already have this answer. This is for that answer. This is kind of take this to the next level rather than kind of starting at the ground. So I think there's levels in the conversations, and we can't answer that like outside of your org. I mean, your team deals with your business. You understand your strategic asset, your data. And so you kind of have to be into that room and start to answer those questions for yourself and for your organization. And then that'll start to shape. And you won't get there overnight. And this is the uncomfortable part about AI, because it'd be great if you can just have this really easy answer to just say, well, the answer is, and then you're done. You just go through this one workshop, you do it, and then you're done. And then your organization is great well into the future. And that's not the case. I think that this will be a bit ambiguous. You can go through the exercise of AI strategy and not have an AI answer for a couple months. Yeah. Right? Like you can go through that, you can do planning for it, you can start to do your data. I'm kind of talking in extremes. You should certainly have an answer before then, but I can see an organization going through the exercise, doing the whiteboarding, having a couple sessions, a couple rounds, and then having that eureka moment a month into it, 2 months into it, and just saying, wow, if we did this, it would be a game changer. And that eureka moment, is not going to happen necessarily day one. It may. But I just, think that organizations should be patient with themselves and really just kind of do the strategic work necessary and follow more of a process, a strategy process for really arriving at an answer, rather than, thinking that, I can just kind of Google it and then boom, it'll pop up in my face, and then kind of have this instantaneous, all right, we have our strategy kind of going forward. I think it may take a little more time than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is awesome. And actually, I think this is kind of funny. Hopefully you find this as entertaining as I do, Khalid. But I was, while you were talking here, you were talking about your book, and you and I have been talking about how you wrote this book, and you're one of the most humble people I know that I've ever worked with. And I didn't realize, I was just Googling it. I didn't realize it was already published. It's on Amazon. It's doing well. It's got great reviews. So your book is actually out. You didn't, like a lot of people talk about writing a book, but you actually wrote and published a book, which I didn't realize until just this moment. So if you don't mind, I'm going to do this. I hate to put you on the spot. I know you're too humble for this, but I am going to put up a QR code top left corner. If you want to check out Khalid's book, just scan the QR code. It's got great reviews. I was just reading while you were talking. I was kind of reading through the reviews and going to the Amazon page here, but it looks like it's selling really well, and you've got great reviews. So congratulations on the book. I kind of wish I would have started with that, knowing that, but you're too humble. You're too humble to tell me you've got this book that's doing really well out there. I knew you wrote it, but I didn't know it was already published.
Well, I kind of needed to get through the exercise, and I've always wanted to write books. So, I always have, I did, I'm starting to kind of get more into the process of it, but I always had little pieces of things kind of. I was a big essay guy, and so I wrote a lot of essays. And so, for this, I needed to I needed to get through it and just kind of get to, what do I think about this? And part of kind of this book, that I wrote, and a couple that I kind of want to do, it's just more, what is my thought around this? Like this topic, this issue that kind of keeps getting thrown in my face. And this was kind of that exercise for me to kind of really dive into this from a strategic consulting business kind of orientation that I think we naturally have here at Third Stage. And so I felt like in parts of this, I was kind of writing to a lot of groups that, we've had conversations with, that, you can't always have these things with your clients. They may not be interested in having this kind of conversation. It's almost a conversation I wish we could have. I wish we can talk about it this way and it not disrupt the project, or, what we're doing or saying, or what you come to us with. Because a lot of times clients will come to us with, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm looking for, and we're working within these kind of boxes. But so you don't get the liberty of kind of being able to say, no, this is really what you should do, and not caring about how it affects them. Like saying, well, I can't do that, that's going to take too long, or that's going to be this, or that's going to be that. Like saying, no, I'm just telling you what you kind of need to do to really think forward and protect yourself. That to me is the way I kind of approached it. And so it really wasn't, I don't know that I was writing the book until I was in the middle or towards the end. And it's like, oh no, you should just go ahead and make this a book, because these pieces in this story, you can just kind of make it fit. So it's a little technical, and it's kind of my first experience there. But I'm happy to get it out. It was just to now have a clear mind around how I view this insane topic, because AI is an insane topic, it's all over the place, and it's very confusing, and there's so many small, what is it? What did the person, he said hype? Yeah, there's so much of these hype conversations that are happening around AI that it's real easy to get distracted by the nuts and bolts of what's really going on.
Yeah, what was the word he used? Something hype. It was such a good word. I need to remember. Inflicted by the hype.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it.
The YouTube video.
Because you're reacting to it, right? And you're reacting to hype, which is the worst thing you could do, right? And you don't want to react to hype. You want to react to other things, but that's certainly how it feels.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I literally just bought your book. Um, I'm going to show right here as proof. I just bought Khalid's book. I can't wait to read it. I highly encourage you to scan the QR code, check it out. And that's really cool. Congratulations again on the book, and thanks for being here to talk about some of the lessons you've learned from writing that book. And I look forward to having you on again to chat more about this, because a month from now, I feel like this conversation might be obsolete. We're gonna have it again, because there'll be something new we've learned over time that we can share with the audience here.
I think certainly another layer, certainly something new. I don't know about obsolete. I think that we're at the beginning of this, and I think we're having a hard conversation about AI. We're not having the hype conversation. This isn't the cool thing to tell people, that you need to get your data in place, and that you need to kind of have a data strategy around before you kind of have an AI strategy. And that's not something that I think people want to hear. They want to hear chat. They want to talk about Copilot and all of these great features that are out there. And that's not what we're talking about per se, but I think that's what's going to drive success in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you sharing your time and your knowledge, and thanks to the audience for the great questions. These are really good questions. In fact, they were so good, I didn't have to really pull up my questions that I sent you in advance. So that was always nice to have a more fluid conversation like that. So thank you for that. And thanks for being here today. We do these live discussions, same time, same place every week, whether you're watching on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or TikTok or LinkedIn. Check it out. Next Tuesday, we'll be back with another guest. We'll actually have one of our clients on the show to talk about robotics and Industry 4.0 type stuff in the manufacturing world. So that'll be one of our clients that I'll be interviewing next week. It's Boston Dynamics. The CIO of Boston Dynamics will be on next week. And then 2 weeks out will be Marcus Harris, who will talk through some of these legal implications of stuff that we sort of danced around or touched on here today. But he'll be on the show here in 2 weeks. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And this podcast will be released as a full episode and a polished episode 2 weeks from tomorrow. So be sure to check out transformationgroundcontrol.com to learn more about that podcast, or to watch all the past episodes of this podcast. Again, if you scan the QR code right here in front of you, that's how you can get Khalid's book. And you can order that off Amazon. And you can also download our guide to AI strategy and implementation, which if you scan the QR code right in front of you here, you can download that for free on our website. So thanks everyone for being here today. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the live podcast interview for Transformation Ground Control. Have a great week in the meantime. Take care.